And here we are live on Zoom. And welcome, Sharon, reading Ken Wapnick on Parents and Children. I'm so grateful to have you here. And the mic is all yours.
Good morning, all.
Live on Zoom. Let's see, there we go.
Okay. Good morning, all. So today I might go back from last week. This is a reading that I'm doing in this particular form to teach myself what I need to learn. And it's really interesting because yesterday I was telling Dove last night, we had a group, Dove had it last night with Lit, a couple people. And I was saying that yesterday I taught third grade, and it was awesome because I was in the present moment most of the time. I didn't have a lot of thoughts and I didn't fall down. And what I saw was that we're always projecting. This whole projection is a matrix. It's coming from the one mind. It's the one mind that is dreaming. Now, this path has taken me full circle because lots of times I would hear, spiritual teachers talking about awakening, but the awakening is happening in the one mind. So how one wakes up isn't special. There's nothing special about anything here. The specialness is separation. And when I come from a place where I feel separate, I then have guilt. That is just the way this ego works. But the ego's nothing, absolutely nothing. We are hallucinating these dreams. Now, this mind that's speaking, I took a lot of, and I think most beings do this, where I realized that a lot of times when I was thinking I was still Sharon was why the course is so tough. You cannot think that you're a character in this dream because the character is actually meaningless. And I had this adoration for the character. I thought she was just awesome. But she's just that, a character. And to be a character, you will suffer. You have to. So, it's important to look at what am I projecting right here, right now? And what I see is this magnificent space that's alive, and the objects are just there, but they don't mean anything. If I don't put meaning to this, there is no meaning. We spoke a little bit about the political climate last night. And yes, sometimes I have preferences. In fact, most of the time I have preferences. However, I realize that everyone that is acting on our screen, we put there. And Dove repeated last night what Regina had taught. Love is giving to spirit, through spirit. That's that which spirit, and I think it was projects, really. So we're always, always giving to spirit, through spirit. That was spirit request. So you see, there's just nothing happening because it's a play that we're having, but yet it's not even happening. Because if you really know that we're still in God's mind, you'd see, at least I do now, that I can't be anywhere but God's mind. There was an attraction to guilt, and it's still there, but it's not at all like it was. So progress is what I see in this mind. I'm making progress, not perfection, but progress. So I'm going to go and talk about what this teaching, what Ken is talking in this book. He's saying the first 3 readings from the text, he is going to introduce to the group. It's called Creating versus the Self-Image. Right teaching, right learning, the ego and false autonomy. Now, why is Ken doing this? He said, deal in one way or another with the authority problem. That's what this whole relationship with our children is. We think that we are in charge of our children, or I think that I was in charge. There was a knowing in me when I used to get up with my oldest boy that I would wake up way before him. And you see, that's spirit waking us up. Spirit is kind of like in the background until it's not. Now it's in the foreground. So it just, and it's not like this mind read the course, every detail, and understood it. That is not important, because you get to a place where you feel like you are the understanding, right? Because only understanding comes from God. It can't come from a world full of ups and downs and hate and love and all of that, right? Because these are concepts. So he's talking about, that we as parents have been under the assumption, and also that our parents were under the assumption that they had something to do with how we turned out. They couldn't, because we're dreaming. And we're dreaming the dreams that will give us the most self-hatred. And if somebody said they had an easy life and they had no self-hatred, then they don't realize, because this whole dream is based on self-hatred. So anyway, he goes on and he says that, and I'm going to just maybe skip a little. Lesson 193, all things are lessons God would have me learn, paints a more general picture how everything in our life offers us an opportunity to forgive. And that's what he really means by lessons. It's always that we forgive because we know we're loved, that we didn't leave our Father, and that the characters that are out there we put there. So therefore, we're responsible for how we feel, because they are loved too. And, for this mind, I think it's seemingly took time, but there really is no time. It's all happening right here, right now. Since no one escapes the lessons that are inherent in the parent-child relationship, this workbook lesson is a clear statement of the importance of this principle. Every time we get upset, it's a forgiveness opportunity. But it's not like I forgive my brother. No, because there's no brothers. There's just projections. And what are we forgiving? We're forgiving that we believe we could actually leave God when we can't. We are in God. That's where we've always been. So what are the levels of teaching? From the manual for teachers, 3 levels of teaching are presented. The first comprises the incidental and seemingly insignificant relationships in our lives. For example, someone you bump into on a street and never see again. The second comprises relationships circumscribed by the time, but within that time period are intense with great potential for learning forgiveness. Now, when this mind would get caught up in a story, it would believe it, because once I'm in the ego, I am in hell, right? And what I've witnessed now is that the ego only has grievances. It can't have anything but. In fact, the one thing it says is, I don't like this. I don't like. And it's passive. But the dream was set up to really, crucify all of us. And if you see what's going out in the world today, and we think we're so right, well, it's also, number one, it's meaningless, because we never left God and we're not people. We are consciousness. But if we go back into the dream, or I go back, I have to bring it back to me. If I go back into my dream and start to worry who's going to win for president or any of that, I'm back in hell, right? So, to usurp the power of God is impossible, right? So anyway, he's saying the first comprises the incidental and seemingly. So we bump into people. That's a script too, right? When you see somebody on the elevator, that's not an accident. Oh, I met that nice person today. Yesterday when I was, and I am going into the past, but again, it's just to teach myself. The past never really happened either. That's really where the blocks of love awareness is, because this whole dream is built on the past, right? So the third compromise is those that once begun are lifelong. So your parents and children are not the reference here, which is the relationships that begin during the course of our lives, like friends or spouses, and then are sustained for life. However, parents and children would obviously fall into this category as well. Now, why is it so? It's built on guilt because it's specialness. It's about separation. We are not separate from our children. And whether it was pre-planned or not, that is unimportant. That can keep me in the ego more than I'd like to be. Because I just want the grace of God, right? So he says here, I begin with a message Jesus had given to Helen Schuckman, to Bill Thetford. The message contains significant material about parents and children, although its context was totally different. It was originally intended to help Bill with the terror might be a better word, to describe his feeling of public speaking and teaching, despite possessing a wonderful speaking and also incidentally singing voice. Where does that come from? Like, where would Bill be so nervous? It's all coming about guilt. We don't, I don't want to be up on stage and I don't want people to reject me. That is really God rejecting me, and that's what Bill felt. Sometimes I feel like the book that we read, Never Forget to Laugh, is teaching me that really this path was really built for Helen and Bill and all of us. But the experience that Bill had is exactly this experience that the Course offers us. So his undoing was really based on the book. Some of our undoings are a little more dramatic, right? I mean, he died right then and there, but he didn't really die. His ego, his costume came off. I posed a question last night, and that was, how could anyone die? I mean, where do they go? They can't go anywhere. So everyone is here, right now. And whether they can speak to us or not is irrelevant, because in my opinion, we never left God anyway. We are just these, archetypes. As Ram Dass would say, we are God in drag. That is the truth too. So Bill was petrified of the classroom. Now, it brings me to a place where was I petrified? Well, I was petrified of a lot of things. There was a couple years in my life that I was afraid of an escalator. Why that came into my mind? That was ego. I had no clue. I can give a story that my mother was afraid of that because she only had one leg. And that could have been a way of, analyzing, it's just making it more important that it is. And it's not necessary to do that. This is when I look at my process as a win-win, because the disciplined mind, or me disciplining this mind, isn't happening from a me, Sharon. It's happening truly because spirit is now in the forefront of this mind, right? And, ego doesn't like this silence, but that's what we really are. So he goes on, and he also talks about Helen Schuckman's absence of felicity. And I think I even read a lot of this last week. So I might go forward, because if this helps anyone, it would be great. But the whole point of me doing this is to teach myself to let go of any belief that anyone here is special. And for this mind, that had to be a lot of like, how could I do that? And it's all guilt. How could I do that? My kids depend on me, my grandchildren, this and that. Well, guess what? They're equal to every son of God, because we never left, right? So in our decision-making minds that chooses everything about our worldly existence, while our bodies simply follow as they are directed by the mind, this is important to consider in reading Jesus's message, as his point to Bill is that he still chooses to feel victimized by his parents. Now that is to cover up the guilt, because the victim, it was a perfect storm, as they say, a perfect dream to make me feel guilty from the beginning of the life that I'm living, because of where I came in and the birth I had. But all of that only helped me. It all helped the mind to see that nothing is worth anything here but God. Oh, it's beautiful. But when I look out there, I think I'm seeing like green and trees, how gorgeous they look. But that's all coming from a lens that's projected. There's no realness to anything. It's this aliveness that made the dream. But what did it make? It made things look like they're real. But are they? As the Course says, nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God, right? So, he's telling us, Ken, here, the past is gone and it have no effect upon us unless our minds choose in the present to give it that power, which we do, again, because we desire the gift that guilt offers us. And this is what he has taken us to. Text chapter 28. All effects of guilt are here no more, for guilt is over. In its passing, when its consequences left without a cause, what would you cling to it in a memory if you did not desire its effects? Remembering is as selective as perception. Let's look at that. Remembering is as selective as perception. And what do we do that for? He's saying, Ken, that it is perception of the past and it is where occurring now and still we're there to see. Okay, that is in text chapter 28. And what are these effects that guilt offers? Simply stated, it affirms the reality of our separated state. Since guilt means our sin is real, which in turn means that our separation actually occurred, well, there you go. Really didn't occur. So the whole point in this process now is to surrender. Because any thought that I believe is true is not. It can't be. So he's saying, furthermore, the ego takes our mind's guilt, represses it, and then projects it onto others. So they would be found guilty of sin, which sin is just separation that deserves God's eternal punishment. That's how much hate is in the mind of man, the mortal mind. There's a lot of hate in there. And to be quite honest, I always knew that. I just thought it was only me that had self-hatred. Actually, you know what? I played victim more than I had self-hatred. So now I realize that victim and victimizer are what we get attached, what I get attached to. Then I get attention. If I was sick when I was a child, my mother was always nice to me. It was always about victim and victimizer, wanting somebody to care. And the only way in the ego you can care about someone is if you think you need them or they need you. It's all about needs. And we really don't need much when we realize that there's nothing here but God. So magically, therefore, we hope to retain our innocence in the face of someone else's sin. What I want to do always is try to say, well, listen, I know blah, blah, blah. I'll say Donald Trump. I don't care if it's on tape because somebody watches it, not a problem, because I don't think they would be the least bit upset what I'm going to say. He is the villain in my dream, right? It's the victim and victimizer. So he's playing a victimizer now, but he still has all the attributes that the Son of God has. They're just unconscious. So his consciousness, and perhaps he knows that he's playing this on some level, because on some level we all know this is a game. It's just not true. The parent-child relationships offer us all ample opportunities to play out this dynamic of innocence achieved at the expense of another's sin. It's so funny that they use the word sin, because that always bothered me, the word sin. Some Christians say we're just all sinners. Well, that's ridiculous. How can a baby be a sinner? But a baby comes in with an ego, and that's what happens. And then they become volatile and hateful because they have a script to follow, but not when they're babies. For the most part, until they know what their name is, they have no clue what they are. They see everything as them. So the theme of chosen victimization is what, the result of projected guilt will run throughout the book. And Jesus's message to Bill introduces this concept to him and to us all. As you, Helen, have so often said, no one has adopted all of his traits, all of his parents' attitudes as his own. Well, that is true. I took what I liked and left it all. But the mind did that, right? The character looked around and said, I think I want to be this trait. And certainly when I scream, I am my mother because she wasn't there. It was just this like rage, but she had so many good qualities. And I see that now because the ego paints our villains as only being villains. I'm quite sure in some world that Donald Trump is good to his family because they lay by his side. So just because he's acting out a very hostile script does not mean that he's any more guilty than I am. I had read something, and I'm not going to talk about it because it's not even important, but just that Fred Trump had a lot of beliefs that are showing through Donald. And that is what happens to all of us. So then there could be some compassion for this character, right? Not true compassion. If you believe in true compassion, you're seeing that there's nothing there. It's compassion in the human psyche that you understand that this guy was given this. But is it random or was it planned? Is it random or it was probably planned on the script, but random as this world is like, I don't know how this guy's running and all this other stuff that might come out of different people's mouths. Look, we are seemingly in a world, but as a light worker, it's time to take responsibility for the truth. Because how can I shed light when I'm in the wrong mind? So, this is interesting because he's saying this is a reference, as you have often said, no one has adopted all your parents' traits. This is a reference, Helen's common practice when she was doing therapy or just helping friends. When people would go on and on about how their problems stem from their relationship with their troubled parents, Helen would explain that if they carefully examined their development from childhood, they would see that they did not adopt every attitude their parents had. That is Jesus's point. The split mind, the decision maker takes what it likes. Sharon doesn't pick it because she's not a person, she's mind. The mind's projecting her, but that's what's going on. In every case, there has been a long process of choice in which the individual has escaped from those he himself vetoed, while retaining those he voted for. Bill has retained his parents' political beliefs in spite of the particular kind of newspapers that constituted their own reading matter in the area. The reason why he could do this was because he believed he was free in this area. Jesus is explaining that Bill decided which attitudes he would be free from. And everything is attitude, isn't it? Jerry Jampolsky had the attitudinal center. And it's all about like when I got up in the morning yesterday, I said, just show me love today. And by the way, that's what happened. The love of everything was just showing up. And there was just a lot of grace. And I was tired at the end of the day, but during the day, it was invigorating to be around these little beings that are just so authentic and have such imaginations. I always, everything's a reflection of our mind. So what I gravitated towards all my life was children. And I seemingly look like a happy person, but I had many grievances because I have ego. And the grievances are the ego. They can't come in without I don't like. That is the ego. And the ego is a foreign voice in the mind of God. And it's only talking to itself. Jesus is explaining that Bill decided which attitudes he would be free from and which he would be enslaved. His parents thus were totally irrelevant to this equation. He simply used them as an excuse for being bound in certain areas and free in others. We need to realize our dishonesty when we claim we are what our parents made us to be. That doesn't necessarily mean it's conscious. The ego is a distractor. It will talk about my birth. I'm very fascinated with Gabor Mate's teachings because I think he's teaching everyone. He does teach awakening, but he also is big on learning about, on a psychological level, how we got there. But there's still, and he also always says, don't blame anybody. But these are just, it's still not as direct and as radical as A Course in Miracles. Because like when I was with Helen Hamilton, she would say, well, you're both. You're the person and you're the noumenon. She called God the noumenon. Well, that's not really true. There are no people. This projection goes in and out through the day, and we don't even know that because the mind's controlling it. It might blink off and on. Who knows, right? Anyway, attitude is everything. So when I get up in the morning, it's important to realize that my attitude is grace. And what is grace? It allows everything. Now, if someone is in danger, of course I'll know what to do because, Spirit knows that we think we're in this world, right? So it's just one of those learning, teaching things. There must be a acute problem of his own that would make him so eager to accept their misperception of his own worth. Why do we misperceive when our parents tell us we'll never amount to anything or whatever? Because we want that. We want so badly to explain the pain it feels like to be separate. And this is a way of doing it, right? One of Bill's childhood experience was that his parents did not value him. That was one of mine. Mine was they looked like they were valuing me, but I'm not important. I'm not important. That's the thing that came up a couple years ago in Helen Hamilton's. I'm not important. And these things, when you have that belief, the world's going to show you how unimportant you are. Oh, yeah, it made me important with an art school, but, again, it always had a downside to it. There was never a complete stream of peace, not ever. So anyway, Bill was, and his parents were devastated by his sister's death. When Bill was around 8 or 9 years old, he developed rheumatic fever and was seriously ill. For a year or so, it was touch and go, but he finally recovered. The clear message he remembered receiving from his parents was that the wrong child died. And that is something to relish in as an ego. Look, they loved her. They didn't love me. So now I don't have to do anything for them. That is how these concepts work through the mind and bring us into hell, right? So the remark is not referred to in this message, but as part of its background. Jesus' point is that Bill never forgot that. Of course, as a child and even as an adult, the attitude is hard to let go of. The point, however, is that we do not let go of it. We can't. The only thing that can is spirit, and that falls away organically. We could just say, go away, I don't want you, but that's not even true either, because for me, the seeing, the vision had to come into the mind, which it did in 21. And once the vision came into my mind, I kind of knew that this was still a dream, but I still indulged. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you laugh at it, because that's what we forgot to do. We forgot to laugh. Anyway, so he's saying, the point, however, is that we do not let it go. One cannot be a loving, healthy parent if one still retains issues like these from childhood. Now, I don't know, I wasn't always a lot, I had my moments, but, for the most part, raising my boys, I seemed to feel like I had this opportunity to connect with them in a way that, the desire for this mind was that she wanted to connect with my mom. I just wanted, that relationship to work. And that is a very good dream because that is God. God's going to say, not you. You're not coming in heaven. You're not. You are annihilated. So anyway, Jesus is in this book is trying to burst Bill's ego bubble. There must be some acute problem of his own that would make him so eager to accept their misperception of his own worth. And that is our misperception, my misperception. I'm misperceiving because I'd rather be separate. Why? Because I'm special. And that is absolutely like an oxymoron. Why is it? Because what is it to be a special human? Nothing. In one moment, it's over. In one moment, oh, I just made this great cake, or I just did this and I just did that. And the truth is, first of all, there is no separate self. So every story is a story that's just coming through the Son of God. However, these stories are held onto by the decision-making mind, wanting very much to be special. But to really take away today is that I'm not a body. There is no body. I'm hallucinating. I'm seeing things that are not there. So the tendency can always be regarded as punitive. It cannot be justified by the inequality of strengths of parents and children. Parents are the authority and have the power, and children are regarded as innocent, helpful victims. Yet Jesus is saying that we cannot justify the belief that our parents made us this way by claiming to be helpless. The clear implication is that children are not helpless nor innocent. This cannot be understood on the level of the body where we are helpless, and that is the truth, but only on the level of the mind. In other words, children set up their parents to be victimizers. That's what we're doing. I put that out there. My mind made this story with my family and my ex-husband. It wasn't like they were even real. It was just because nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists. Therein lies the peace of God. It's that simple. Our guilt demands we be punished, which ego welcomes for it, proves that its separation is reality, a sin that deserves a punitive response. So that's what he's saying. Over and over, we are learning, or I am learning, how ridiculous it was to tell one more story about my past. It is ridiculous. I mean, I could talk about my grandchildren because, it's the present day, but I wouldn't get into a whole story because they're not here. They're not here right now when I talk about these thoughts. They're not. So what's the point? Although I love to be around them because, again, they are children. When Bill's father came to his new office and destroyed it, in quotes because that was Bill's word, it is quite apparent that Bill must have been willing to let it be destroyed. This does not mean that Bill was responsible for his father's action, but that unconsciously he wanted his father to destroy his office. On the level of the unconscious with the ego, I wasn't present to know this, but I can see now that the ego is thinner, that I always want everybody to, get what they want and be treated fairly. And the point is, it's really only me. And I always thought that was an attribute for an ego. But is it really? Unless I include everyone, there's no attribute, really. And this is me when it says, consider how many times we have told and retold incidents of the past. It does not have to be a distant past. How often do we play our abuse stories, whether overt, sexual, physical, or emotional? How much a part of our memories they are, how gladly we pay a therapist good money week in and week out to retell our story over and over again. The very fact that we do this tells us the great importance we place on the event that happened. This, again, does not make us responsible for other people's egos. that act out against us. Yet the fact that we never let go of the memory, and indeed often build our self-concept on the foundation of such abuse, reveals that something is rotten is in the state of our minds, and it is not what was done to us. What is rotten is the guilt that says we deserve to have terrible things done to us. It is about the, kill or be killed. It really is. It is and now the demonstration is, coming up in this political scene. Kill and be killed, But watching the mind is very therapeutic in this case, anyway. And so, what does Jesus told Bill with specifics application of what he was teaching? His first two students, and all of us in this course, no one is ever justified in seeing oneself as innocent, unfairly treated victim. If we perceive ourselves that way, referred to again as a temptation, is because we want to be unfairly treated. And here he has a passage that he wants me to read. He seems a sorry figure, weary, worn, in threadbare clothing, and with feet that bleed a little from the rocky road he walks. No one but has identified with him. For everyone who comes here has pursued the path he follows and has felt defeat and hopelessness as he's feeling them. Yet, is he really tragic when you see that he is following the way he chose and need but realize who walks with him and open up his treasures to be free? So we never left God. Spirit's been here the whole time. What happens is love's presence becomes the forefront and the thoughts are secondary. Moreover, if we consistently maintain that we have been unfairly treated as a child, there is no way we can avoid unfair treatment when we are parents. This holds whether we believe we are unfairly treated by our children or treat them unfairly, or we abuse authority in whatever position we have, parental or otherwise. Jesus is telling Bill there is a decision-making part of the mind that holds on to this self-image. Yet that part is totally unconscious, which is why the issue continues and continues. The question then becomes, why would anyone accord an obvious misperception so much power? There cannot be any real justification for it, because even Bill himself recognized the real problem by saying, how could he do this to me? The answer is he didn't. The answer is he didn't. And when you really see those words, you can feel that peace, and it is the peace of God. It's the peace of love, acceptance, and nowness. So, Bill's father did this to himself and to the office. He didn't do it to Bill. Whatever his father's projections onto Bill, they were projections and had nothing to do with his son. Bill's part in it was claiming it was done to him. In other words, he made a connection between his father's aggression and his son himself as a victim. Again, the problem was not what his father did or did not do, but Bill's interpretation. What are we telling ourselves about what's out there? Because interpretation is the thing that keeps this dream alive, right? And so Jesus' message is that we must accept responsibility for our decisions. We are not responsible for the decisions others make, but we are most definitely responsible for the decision to let their decisions affect us. Our bodies or office can indeed be affected, but never our minds. Bill's lament, how could he do this to me, was not a genuine question. Rather, it was a statement of victimization. Wow. How could you do this to me? And Jesus' answer to us, all sharing the same lament, is unequivocal. He didn't. Bill's question, which he must ask himself very honestly, is whether he is willing to demonstrate that his parents have not hurt him. Unless he's willing to do this, he has not forgiven them. So what is he saying here? He's saying Bill's question, which he must ask himself very honestly, is whether he is willing to demonstrate that his parents have not hurt him. Well, I don't think that I'm going to go back and say to my kids, listen, they know I know this is a dream because they've heard me say it, but they're not interested in this awakening process. So it's meaningless for me to say anything, and just listen with compassion and love. Anyway, this is a key theme in A Course in Miracles, for it goes to the heart of forgiveness. We forgive others by demonstrating our invulnerability to their attack. Why our bodies may be vulnerable, we are not the body. What is required for this is to shift identification from body to the mind, from mindlessness to mindfulness. Indeed, people might have hurt our bank accounts, houses, or cars. Most difficult lesson for a child to learn, but A Course in Miracles is not written for children. However, it is written for spiritual children. It is only when we get older that we are able to say finally that carrying around this burden of victimization and abuse is no longer worth it. That is when we are able to lay it down. Going back to the context of this message, Jesus is going back to the unforgiveness of his father and mother. In saying he is damaged and therefore cannot teach this class, Bill is recently making an accusation. You did this to me because you preferred my sister to me, because you destroyed my manhood by destroying my office. I cannot teach, and my vulnerability, your attacks, is damning indictment of you. That is what we all do when we carry around our stories and tell them over and over again. Here is the importance of sentence again, to which we can relate. The many times that he has commented on this event alone would suggest the extreme importance of this misperception in his own distorted thinking. Be honest with yourself and see how many times you tell the same story. Someone in your family acts out against you, and you call the rest of the family to tell the story. Someone in the office does something unkind or unfeeling, and you run to tell your friends. Now, that's what I saw yesterday in the classroom. This brings me to third grade yesterday. They were telling on each other all through the day. And that is their guilt, because they already know their name. They're in third grade, right? So they know. So guilt is in the forefront of their mind. So they were tattletales. And I was saying to them, no, you can't do that to your friends. You don't let the teacher decide unless someone is in danger. You see, it starts very young that we become attackers, right? So if someone in the office does something unkind or unfeeling and you run to tell your friends in the office, your boss comes down hard on you and you quickly tell everyone you can find. The more you tell your sad story, the better you feel, because you are strengthening the perception. Really a misperception that you are the victim. And so we repeatedly regurgitate our terrible childhood experiences. Our not letting them go tells us how very important they are to us. To repeat this crucial point, we are not responsible for others' people's abusive behavior toward us, but we are responsible for the belief that their behavior has to do with us personally, when in truth, it has nothing to do with us at all. If we're still in God and these dreams are coming from my mind, then who could have hurt me but me? Right? The essential goal of therapy is the same as of knowledge. No one can survive independently as long as he is willing to see himself through the eyes of others. And that's another real important sentence. As a child, we cannot help seeing ourselves through parental eyes. Yet the problem is that we do so often Do not outgrow these perceptions. Yes, Bill's parents misperceived him, but Bill held on to this misperception until he made it his own. Wow. And so Jesus asks him, all of us, to let it go. There is no justification for holding on to it except the desire to get as much ego mileage as possible from it. We are the innocent victims, and it is not our fault that our lives are such a mess. And we cannot adequately perform certain functions, if at all. This will always put him in a position where he must see himself in different lights. This last phrase is published in the course on text chapter 3, section 10. Bill sees himself in different lights because of his parents' perceptions and misperceptions of him, not to mention those of others. We never look at ourselves independently of the world. This ultimately means seeing ourselves the way Jesus sees us, for we set aside the vision of us, fighting that we are the ones who set it aside to fill the perceptual vacuum. We thus adopt the views of others. Parents do not create the image of their children. A child comes into the world with its self-image intact. One of the tremendous burdens parents labor on, unfortunately, reinforced by psychologists, is that they are responsible for their children. This is the illusion children love to perpetuate, which is why when they grow up, they learn tombs about it. However, the fact of the matter is that children are born with fully developed egos. You can't come in this dream in a body or seeming body if you're not. So you're going to have positive and negative attributes, right? So there is no reason to tell the story anymore about the past, really. Until you can't tell the story anymore, it comes out. And now it's just like, no, I don't want it. I just don't want it. What the kids always say, Ken says, is I exist and it is your fault. The ego strategy in a nutshell. I am here, but I'm not responsible. In other words, I'm the innocent victim, which everyone's self-image. Parents, therefore, do not make that image, but they reinforce it. Simply, we reinforce the ego in each other just as we have the power to reinforce the Holy Spirit. The ego rationalizes, like, there were 4 girls in my family, and, I'm learning as I go within that my mother in the dream was just a representation of a lot of self-hatred for this mind. However, she was also hurting because she never had the opportunity on a human level to bond with me at birth. And for years, she was in and out of the hospital. So the compassion on a worldly level is a good step to have for her. And then also to realize that she wasn't even there, that I'm not there either, because I'm just looking at projections coming from the matrix. That's all it is. So, in other words, our images of ourselves are idols, substitutes for God. We substitute our guilt-ridden images for the one God has of us, pure spirit and perfect love, at one with him and his son. We then invite everyone in our lives to join us in reinforcing the ego's image. At the end of the text, we read that the self has no concept or image of itself. And that's with a capital S. And so we substitute the ego's idolatrous self-individuality for the pure self of Christ. And that is really, when we looked at, A Course in Love, that was what came up last week was, who is it that has to wake up? Well, the Christ, because that's what we are. And that's what moves forward in this dream. Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it. We're not an image. We are not this idol we've adopted as a substitute for glorious self that God created. We substitute the idol for truth. and then conveniently forget we have done so, making up a life in which we are born as helpless, innocent little things whom our parents now sully and denigrate. This beautiful image of ourselves that God created is seemingly shot to hell by our parents who believe with the rest of the world that we are bodies. If I see anything out there, and I haven't, looking at the changeless awareness, that's all that's here. To identify somebody in a body is really, well, what Eckhart Tolle has said, it's violent, because the body is always in duality. It's not the love of God. It can't be, because the love of God is, continued through the Son of God and the Creator's lives, that we are life, that we, in the dream, we are life. That's what we are. But we haven't left either. And there can be confusion in this dream when we start trying to understand it, really, because it's hard to understand something that never really even happened, So he's saying, we want to come back to that God created us in this beautiful, beautiful likeness to itself. Love created us like itself. Kindness created it like itself, right? So, we are not an image, and we substitute the idol for truth, and then conveniently forget we have done so, making up a life in which we are born as helpless, innocent little things, whom our parents now sully and denigrate. This beautiful image of ourselves that God created is seemingly shot to hell. I read that before, but by our parents who believe with the rest of the world that we're bodies. We have no recollection of any of this because we scripted a life in which we are born with an undeveloped brain that is incapable of doing this, leaving only the illusion that it was our parents' fault. Jesus' point to Bill and to all of us is that we cherish these experiences when our parents misperceived us, because they prove we are not responsible for our miserable lot in life. Yet we have an inadequate self, but we did not do it. All the while we glory in this self with a lowercase s, worshiping at its altar of specialness. So it's always about separation. Specialness is separation. So now I'm going to close, and Lynn, we're going to get started on the next book. And thank you, everyone, whoever joined with me. I love you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. This has been wonderful.